What is going on, everyone? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the Season 2 finale of Star Trek Discovery, an episode titled Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2. I'll go ahead and say in advance that I think this was the high point of the season, definitely superior to the Season 1 finale, but I still have my fair share of grievances, so if you're only in the mood to hear praise about this particular episode, now is your opportunity to bail out. But if you're still with me, what amazes me is how in spite of all the action featured in this episode, that in its final scenes, the writers would choose to clumsily and awkwardly try to clean up past mistakes when it comes to continuity, rather than just telling the best dramatic story possible. The Season 2 finale successfully made the past two seasons feel completely irrelevant and immaterial, so why the hell did I invest so many hours into following both seasons? Hindsight is 20/20, as they say, but just imagine for a moment if Season 1 had simply started with wherever the crew of the Discovery will find themselves at the beginning of Season 3. They could have teased a few key story beats from the first two seasons periodically in flashbacks, but the show would have had the freedom to carve its own destiny, be its own thing, without alienating half of the Star Trek fan base, fans who have devoted decades of their lives to following this franchise. At any rate, I'll be breaking down my frustrations in greater detail later in the video, but before I get to my official review, I did want to share some Star Trek news. TrekMovie.com this week featured a series of interviews with Jonathan Frakes about working on the Orville, as well as Star Trek Discovery, and he confirmed that he's booked to direct episodes 3 and 4 of Picard, as well as some episodes of Season 3 of Discovery. I always love seeing Riker in the director's chair, and it'll be interesting to see what he and Patrick Stewart are able to do together when they're reunited. There was also a petition that went somewhat viral a few days ago pushing for a new Star Trek show featuring Pike and Spock. Anson Mount appeared to be incredibly flattered by the gesture, but stated that such a show is highly unlikely. And my last bit of news is a heads up that next week is the Season 2 finale of The Orville, a show that I strongly recommend folks get caught up on. Irrespective of which franchise you're more loyal to, there is room in the human heart for both. But that means that my Thursday evenings are finally going to be free for the first time in 2019, so prepare to be inundated with a lot of movie reviews of new releases as the summer movie season kicks off next week with Avengers Endgame. In any event, let's get down to it with this season finale. As I predicted last week, it was pretty much wall-to-wall action as the crew of the Discovery and the Enterprise worked together to protect Burnham from Leland and his fully automated Section 31 so that Burnham can open up a wormhole, fly to the future with Discovery, placing the sphere data far from the reach of control for centuries. A pitched battle erupts as Discovery and Enterprise launch every shuttle and pod they have at their disposal to throw down with their adversary, and pretty much every major or minor character from the show so far had a little hero moment, either to make a contribution to the fight or in some cases a heroic sacrifice. I have no idea what this episode cost to produce, but they definitely went all out on the special effects budget with the absolutely chaotic battle at the heart of this episode. In the end, controls destroyed, Burnham and Discovery travel into the future, and the crew of the Enterprise decides never to speak a word of what happened to Discovery. In theory, cleaning up all the problems created by an ill-conceived, sloppily constructed show that could have solved all these problems in advance by simply not being set in the past. Serialized stories tend to unfold nice and organically when writers build toward the future instead of cannibalizing the past. But let's start with the good parts that made an impression on me. Anson Mount deservedly has built himself a good solid fan base with this show, and while I was very skeptical of him early in the season, he made me a believer. It's safe to say that Mount has fully recovered from the debacle that was the Inhumans, and any problems that I have with his character come from bad writing, like the scene where he says farewell to Saru and he says, "Goodbye, my friend, my family." This episode just had way too many drawn-out, dramatic soap opera beats where characters start to bond while all around them, people are dying. But I promised that this initial portion would be positive, so another key detail that I liked was how cool Burnham looked in the Red Angel suit flying around in the middle of the battle. Admittedly, the show is trying to recreate Iron Man essentially in the middle of a scene straight out of a Star Wars movie, but apart from Burnham trying a little too hard to strike cool poses before she would launch herself, I have to admit that her Red Angel armor looked pretty badass. I also like seeing George Yu get to embrace her evil side for once, as she delighted in the agony of Leland during his death scene. Georgiou is a totalitarian dictator who used to eat Kelpians. Softening her edges is the worst thing they could do to her character, so I was relieved that for a brief shining moment, we got to see Michelle Yeoh actually have some fun with the character. And lastly, in spite of all my complaints about the story choices this season, this episode at least tied up pretty much every remaining subplot and put a little bow on the show, giving the season a sense of finality. The show definitely needed a clean slate, and now they have one. Now, I don't want to get too nitpicky with my criticisms, but this finale was riddled with flaws that prevented it from reaching its full potential. Let's start with my chief complaint, which is the scene where Burnham and Spock say goodbye. In spite of being in the middle of a pitched battle where their friends are dying all around them, Burnham and Spock had this long, slow, drawn-out farewell where Burnham starts giving Spock a road of life lecture. She tells him that what he needs to do in the future is to find a person who seems farthest from him and to reach out to them. And in essence, this gives Burnham credit for forging what might be the most famous friendship in the history of science fiction, Kirk and Spock. This is the kind of unnecessary retconning that drives fans fucking crazy, because rather than building up Burnham through her own actions, the writers feel the need to have her stand on the shoulders of other people's accomplishments and then take credit for them. We saw the same nonsense in Captain Marvel, where they tried to retcon the MCU into giving credit for the name Avengers to Carol Danvers instead of Nick Fury. It's a petty attempt to rewrite pop culture history with an obvious agenda, and it's annoying as hell. Another lingering concern I have is why Burnham and the Discovery even needed to go through the wormhole as planned. In the middle of the battle, Georgiou takes out Leland, effectively killing Control and rendering its ships inert. So the problem's solved. The sphere data is no longer in any danger being used by Control to end all sentient life. There was plenty of time to abort the plan to fly into the future, yet none of these brainiacs in the show thought to bring this up. A simple fix in terms of story structure would have been to have Leland die after Burnham and the Discovery have already vanished. There are so many little problems like this. For instance, how are we to believe that the Kelpians, who until recently were living like beach bums in little huts, are actually effective in dogfights out in space? Or when Admiral Cornwall makes the ultimate sacrifice of sealing off a blast door to save Spike from an exploding torpedo, the blast takes out a huge chunk of the saucer section, yet Pike, who's standing only a few feet away on the other side of the blast door, doesn't even appear to budge. This is Star Trek. People have been lampooning it for decades about people kind of stumbling around whenever the ship gets shot. At a bare minimum, Pike should have shown some sort of reaction. But my biggest gripe is that in the final scenes, what should have been the emotional peak of the show, the writers are still trying to clean up their own mistakes by offering a plausible explanation as to why neither Burnham, Discovery, the Spore Drive, etc. have ever been mentioned as being part of Star Trek history. With the behind-the-scenes chaos of so many different showrunners and so many different writers, I'm not surprised at all how these mistakes were made, but dramatically and emotionally, the finale of this season should have been about Discovery and its crew, not setting up a much more interesting and much more entertaining show about the Enterprise with Pike and Spock, a show that we are highly unlikely ever to see. So reviewing this season on this channel has been a little bit of a roller coaster for me. Ordinarily, I try and focus on stuff that I love just for peace of mind, but with so much going on in the world of Star Trek these days, I really have no choice but to try and stay on top of things out of past loyalty to the franchise. My hope is that, and this might be foolishly naive on my part, that with so many Star Trek shows in development, some of the episodes might end up being great, even if it's by accident rather than design. Every previous iteration of the show has always had some classic episodes that you want to revisit many times. Discovery's been the one big exception. But Patrick Stewart, he's a living legend. I'll obviously be back for Picard. And I have a feeling every single writer associated with that show would do their best to create the best show possible. But just as a way of ending this review on a positive note, if you're a hardcore sci-fi fan and you find that you have an itch that Discovery is failing to scratch, pick up the book Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. It's the first of 8 books so far in the series The Expanse, which has been very successfully adapted into a show that will soon be releasing its 4th season on Amazon. As you can see, I've got the first 7 books right here proudly displayed on my shelf. And this is the best ongoing sci-fi franchise right now on the big screen or on the small by a huge margin. When aging franchises like Star Trek or Star Wars fail to deliver the goods or appear to be horribly mismanaged, the best thing you can do is give your attention, your eyeballs, and your dollars to people who are getting it right. So with that, I think I'm going to sign off. If you've been following my reviews and recaps throughout the season, you have my sincere thanks, my sincere gratitude. When it comes to reviewing future sci-fi shows, I'm a little bit at a loss as to what I'm going to be pivoting toward. Obviously, we got The Expanse Season 4, but I'll need to check and see what else is on the calendar. I think we're going to get Altered Carbon Season 2 at some point. But if any of you out there have some good sci-fi recommendations of things you would like me to cover on this channel, definitely send them my way. If you want to reach me, the best place to find me is always on Twitter at Colbrax. There's a link in the description below. But if you would consider subscribing to this channel, liking the video, I would greatly appreciate it. So thanks again for watching this video. Hope everyone has an amazing weekend, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.